everybody, Claudia Boleyn here, and welcome to Claudia Boleyn Reviews Doctor Who. Today I am reviewing Heaven Sent by Stephen Moffat. I think that this episode, Heaven Sent, is a 10 out of 10 episode. I cannot actually fault it, which is pretty rare for me, because as you know, I'm quite a picky critic, especially when it comes to a Stephen Moffat episode. But I remember when I saw this episode the first time round, I remember thinking straight afterwards, wow, this is the episode. This episode is a classic, it's going to be iconic, it is incredible. I'm not quite sure what it is about the episode which just makes it perfect for me, but I think just all the elements, and it's strange. I love the fact they took a risk with it. I think that's part of what really pleased me, because, I mean, this whole episode is carried by one man, and that man is Peter Capaldi, and he is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I've had trouble with really bonding with 12 in the past, but I do think that's down to scripts and the stories rather than Peter Capaldi, because he has consistently been very good in the role. I don't know of that many actors that could have carried an episode like that. I just think he's absolutely fantastic, and I cannot praise him enough for that episode. I think in the future this episode's going to become known as probably 12's iconic episode, and I'd be really happy if it does, because I think it really shows off Peter Capaldi to his best. So as per usual with my reviews, this one's going to be a list, so I'm going to list it in episode order this time, because I took these notes while watching the episode the first time round. Obviously this review will be spoilery. I'm not going to censor what I'm saying at all in terms of spoilers, because I'm assuming it's been a while now. I'm sure most people have seen the whole series. If not, go and watch this on iPlayer while it's still available, and then come back here and watch my review. I think part of what really drew me into this episode is I was an English literature student, and I loved English literature, and I still do, and I'm really into symbolism and just, oh, I love it so much. And I feel like this entire episode was like a great big metaphor. It was a great big analogy, and there was so much to pick apart. I would love to be an English lit student right now, picking this episode apart in an essay and talking about themes and motifs and symbolism and that kind of thing. So it's kind of what I've done here, actually, but I will try and spare you the major English lit stuff. So keeping it really basic, the whole episode and the idea of being in the confession dial is kind of a metaphor for the Doctor's life, because he's constantly running. He's running away from something he can't quite get away from. He has little pit stops every so often where he gets a little bit comfortable, but he can never be allowed to completely relax, because he has to keep on going, keep on fighting. He can't give up, because something will get him if he does. He literally burns himself out in the end to make way for a new man. So it's like the confession dial is the Doctor's life just condensed into that tiny little dial, and actually looking at it in that way is incredibly disturbing and nightmarish. I mean, that's the word I'd use to describe the episode, other than brilliant, is nightmarish, because it seems like being stuck in a nightmare. And it really made me think about how the Doctor's life, in some ways, is a bit of a nightmare, really. Again, it's going with quite a big theme of this series, which is also covered by Ashildr / Lady Me, and it's the idea of being trapped inside your life as an immortal. I also think the lack of Clara is very important for this metaphor, because I feel like in Lady Me and Ashildr's case, when you're living as an immortal and you're alone, you can become very bitter, and it's a very painful experience, and you keep on going, but it's a very negative sort of experience. And that's kind of what the Doctor feels when he's inside this confession dial. Not that he knows it's a confession dial, but I think the fact that he's alone makes it so much worse. It's the loneliness. Obviously, loneliness is a massive factor of the Doctor's life, because he does meet people and he makes great friendships, but to him they are mayflies. They don't really live for very long compared to him, so it must be a very lonely existence, and it's something I hadn't thought about for a while, actually, and just watching this episode made me realise how lonely a life the Doctor actually lives, and how important it is for him to have someone like Clara who's there to ground him and keep him positive, because as we've seen with Ashildr, if you're left to your own devices and you're alone and you don't have that moral conscience, you don't have anyone to be good for in a way, that can go very horribly wrong. I got some really big Tom Baker vibes from this episode, which is a huge compliment to Peter Capaldi. I really feel like the 12th Doctor came into his own in this episode. I got a complete picture of what he's like, because everything was stripped away. I love it when the Doctor is more of a vulnerable character. The times when I've been less fond of the Doctor, I've said this a million times, but I'm sorry for repeating myself, but it's like with the later 11th Doctor, when he became more of a cool dude, hero character, I felt like he lost some of his depth, and I prefer a sort of vulnerable Doctor, and I don't mind the bravado at all. I like a bit of bravado, as long as it's clear to the viewer that that is bravado, and that underneath you've got a very lost, very vulnerable person who needs a companion to guide him and look after him. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the nightmare elements of this episode, because it really did feel very much like a nightmare, and there were so many elements of this confession dial horrible scenario which were nightmarish. So I can't imagine there's any viewer that watched this episode that was not scared at some point, because I feel like Stephen Moffat thought about some of the most scary things imaginable, fears that a lot of us have, meshed them all together, made sure they all featured to make us all feel really uneasy, because the whole episode, as much as I adore it, it's not an easy one to watch, and it's not one that you enjoy watching. You do in terms of the fact it's great television and you really appreciate it and you enjoy it for that, but it's not something you sit down for if you're having a laugh and having a biscuit or a cup of tea. You have to be in the zone for this, because it's intense and makes you feel really uneasy, and your back gets tingles down it the whole time, and it's just ugh. So one of the nightmare elements is the idea that the castle the Doctor is in is circular and it keeps moving. So there's this idea of being trapped in it, of not being able to get anywhere, of it going on and on and on and being endless. Also the idea of the fact that something is chasing you in a corridor which is round is frightening, because you can't keep your eye on it. You never know where it is or how close it is to you. This might just be a weird thing that I have, but I would find if there were flat walls it's easier, because when I'm scared I like to have my back against something. I don't know if that's just me, that when I'm really freaked out I don't like my back being unguarded, and having like a circle shaped corridor, having those circular walls that aren't flat, you never quite feel safe there. There's nowhere you can go and feel safe. You're just always very vulnerable from both sides. Obviously another nightmare element used in this episode is the idea of something following you. Most people have the dream where you're trying to get away from something but you can't run fast enough and it won't stop coming after you, whatever that may be, whatever you're scared of. And I think that's pretty much what Stephen Moffat was trying to tap into with this, and I think it worked really well. For me, I thought there was something especially frightening about the fact that this thing that was following the Doctor was so slow and steady. I mean, I know it probably would have been scary if it was fast as well, but there's something about it going so slowly and so steadily that you know it's not going to stop. It's determined, and it's coming after you no matter what. Obviously, as the Doctor pointed out, the whole scary element of that situation, no matter how scary the thing following you is, I think the big fear of that situation is actually the idea of something being in pursuit, something chasing you. So the fact that it goes slowly just draws out that terror excellently. Another nightmare element is being completely on your own. The fact that the castle seems to be uninhabited apart from by the Doctor and this creature that's following him around, which doesn't even seem like it's really alive. There's something very scary about the idea of this massive, massive place with all these rooms and yet there's nothing in it. Another nightmare element is the amnesia. Obviously we don't find out that until later on in the episode, but the idea of going through something and then forgetting is quite a scary one. Next one is this idea of where am I? The fact that the Doctor, who is this super intelligent character who's been all over the place to different planets, to different time zones, the fact that he doesn't know where he is really, really unsettling. And it's also a fear that Clara Oswald has as well. Obviously Clara's worst fear is being lost and not knowing where she is, so it's kind of that fear that we're returning to. I mean, this place could be anywhere because it mixes the like medieval architecture of this old medieval castle with cogs and machinery, and obviously it's constantly moving and the Doctor can see the stars and the stars aren't quite right. And there's technology, obviously there's those screens showing the thing coming, which I will talk about in a minute. And this blend of different times is just so confusing and unsettling. The idea of being very small is another big nightmare element that Stephen Moffat uses in this episode. There's this sense that our hero, the Doctor, is so tiny in this scenario. I mean, just the fact that the castle is so big and vast and there's so much empty space around him. There's a real sense of him being very small and insignificant and having no control over the proceedings, which is awful. Then there's the idea of the exit, which is not an exit. So you have the Doctor seeing a door at the end of the corridor while he's being pursued by the creepy monster. First of all, he can't open it, and when he finally does manage to open it, there's just another wall behind the door, and that's something that pops up in lots of people's nightmares, I think. What I personally think is the most scary nightmare element of this whole episode, and tell me if any of the others are what you find the scariest, but I think it's probably this one, is the idea of being watched by someone. Obviously, when the Doctor is in the confession dial, he's being watched the entire time, and there are screens set out especially for him so he can see that he's being watched, which is just horrible. I think lots of us are quite worried about that. I mean, I, for one, have a piece of blue tack over my webcam screen when I'm not using it because I have like a paranoia that someone's going to look through it one day. But I think a lot of us were really uneasy with that kind of thing, even with like CCTV cameras in the street. The idea of being watched by someone powerful, the idea of being watched by someone when you don't know who it is and what they're watching for is pretty scary as well. So those were the nightmare elements in this episode, and I do complain about Stephen Moffat all the time. I know I do. But when it comes to writing horror, psychological horror, he is very talented, I have to admit. Like, lots of his episodes in the past have been excellent for scares. He's very, very good at that. And I feel like in this episode he really managed to show off that skill to great effect. So I think he was exactly the right writer for this. I think it was exactly the right sort of story for him. And I really can't praise him enough for it. I think it was really well done. And you know what? I can't actually imagine that many other writers being able to marry that many nightmare tropes in one episode so seamlessly. So the monster itself was very creepy, with its creepy lurching and the scary cloak and the disgusting flies flying around it, which is just so gross. But again, very well done by Stephen Moffat, because it's like it's like a classic horror film. Like, you know it's coming when you see those damn flies, but you don't always know where it is. That's really scary. It's also really interesting that that's one of the Doctor's worst fears. So obviously he does have a big fear of death, which he admits in the episode itself. I was thinking, actually, watching this episode, how different another Time Lord's confession dial might be. I wonder if this particular confession dial was fashioned around all the Doctor's greatest fears. So if all those nightmare elements I mentioned were part of the Doctor's particular nightmares, or if a different Time Lord or a different person would have an entirely different sort of place. It might not even be a castle, it might be a different shape. It just really interests me. Like, I wonder if that was tailored specifically for the Doctor, the entire thing. I mean, if it is, there's a lot we can read from that. So it took me quite a while to realise that we were actually inside the confession dial. My brother realised almost straight away we were in the dial, but for some reason it just didn't click with me. I think maybe I was distracted by all the other scary, unsettling stuff. But really, the set dressing, once you know, I mean, when you watch it back, when I watched it for a second time, I was so impressed with how it all fits. Of course, it's like you want to slap yourself. You want to be like, of course it's the confession dial. Like, the shape of it, the fact that in each room there seem to be like cogs. It's blindingly obvious, and I just wish I had noticed the first time. The set itself and the way this episode was dressed was so excellent. Again, it's that uneasy meshing of, it's like old medieval sort of furniture and stuff, which is the type I like. I love a bit of medieval furniture. So you had all the comforts, so you had like the comfy beds and the roaring fires, and then you'd also have things that were maybe slightly unsettling, like you had the vase of lilies, which lilies are a symbol of death. You had the image of Clara, the portrait of Clara, the painted portrait in the gold frame, which should have been a nice touch, but was actually unsettling because the paint was peeling on it. I feel the music had a big part to play in this episode, because at times it was so big and orchestral and cinematic almost, and sometimes it sounded a little bit Pirates of the Caribbean-y in places, and then at other times it would go into like classic Tom Baker soundtrack music, like that sort of vibe. So I really feel like the music really moved this episode along. So the one very slight fault which I can see with the episode, which isn't even a fault really, it's a matter of preference. It's the idea of the Doctor, when he jumped out of the window, going to what seemed to be a mine palace. So obviously, I'm sure if you watch Doctor Who, you probably watch Sherlock as well, which is also a show which is written sometimes by Stephen Moffat. So in the past, I've had issues with the 12th Doctor being written too much like BBC Sherlock, because sometimes I found there's little distinction between them, which is worrying. That wasn't a problem in this episode at all, because obviously he was very much the 12th Doctor, he was very strong as a character in this episode. But it is an idea that's been reused, and a lot of people online did point that out and weren't so keen about that. It was very much like Sherlock, like uncannily like it. You know, how did he manage to jump, all that sort of stuff that we had in Sherlock, how did he manage to survive it, and obviously that mind palace idea thing has been done a million times. However, I did love all of the scenes that took place within the Doctor's sort of mind palace, which was his TARDIS, because it really allowed us to see more into the Doctor's mind. One of the touches which I thought was the most brilliant was obviously having Clara there, but not really there. We could see the back of Clara's head and we could see it was her because of her clothes, but she never turned around. We never really saw her. We only got to see her once in the whole episode, and it happened very quickly. There was something a little bit unsettling about that as well, because you could tell it wasn't the real Clara. It was just something really unsettling and odd about it. I thought that was an excellent interpretation of what it's like when you lose somebody, when you're grieving. And maybe I am getting too deep when I watch this, but sometimes when you lose someone, very quickly you forget little details about them, like sometimes the way their voice sounds starts to fade, or the way their face, like little details about their face start to go. And I wondered if that was why we had Clara with her back to the Doctor. I wonder if that was the Doctor starting to lose Clara slightly. I'm not sure if that's what they were going for, but either way it worked fantastically well. Having Clara in the TARDIS and writing on that chalkboard was fascinating in terms of learning more about the 12 and Clara dynamic, because you can really see what the Doctor needs Clara for and why he values her. Clara is obviously not just there so the Doctor can show off to her. Clara is the Doctor's moral compass and she's his guidance, and he's very much checking in with her. I know that the Doctor likes to think that he's the big brainy one, but as we've seen in this series, he often has to check in with Clara. He has an idea, but he wants to make sure it's alright with Clara first before he goes ahead. He's very conscious of making sure that Clara feels proud of him and that he doesn't disappoint her. The idea of Clara as a teacher in this episode worked fantastically well, because it just emphasised how very much Clara has become like the Doctor. She's his equal to the extent that the Doctor is asking her for advice. He doesn't know what to do, so he asks Clara Oswald. He asks his teacher. At one point he asks Clara, "What would you do?" And she says, "Same as you." And he says, "Yes, of course you would," which, let's be honest, is what killed you, which is incredibly sad, because obviously it's the Doctor's guilt over what happened to Clara. And also because, yeah, it's totally true, that's the arc of the series. Unfortunately, as Clara became more and more like the Doctor, she is a mortal person, unlike the Doctor. She doesn't have multiple regenerations. Not yet, anyway. Spoiler alert. And so, yeah, it's very poignant to hear that. It's very sad. Again, I feel like I might be reading too much into it, but it's incredibly sad for the Doctor to say those words. It's like he's saying to himself and reminding himself, there is no one like him. As much as he surrounds himself with friends and as close as he gets to people, they're not immortal. They can't possibly understand. They can't be with him, and they're going to hurt him when they go. I think sometimes the Doctor can see himself as like a bad influence on his companions' lives. And yeah, in some ways, especially in the past with 11, the companions haven't had a great time with him, like some bad things have happened to them. But I think in this instance it works really well, because obviously the 12th Doctor has been very good to Clara. Clara died because of her compassion, and also she's not really dead. So we had so many jump scares in this episode. I swear, that bit in the courtyard where the Doctor has the shovel and he's digging and that creepy cloak thing is wandering around. Terrifying. When he opened the door, I knew it was going to be behind the door, but I jumped and screamed anyway. All 3 times I watched the episode, that was my reaction. I get frustrated every time I watch the episode, because obviously there's a shovel in that damn courtyard, and if only the Doctor could remember earlier that he keeps reliving the same thing over and over again, he might remember to take the shovel with him, because I imagine a shovel would be great help when he's trying to break through the bloomin' diamond wall at the end. I mean, it's got to work better than using your fist, hasn't it? The idea of the Doctor looking for room 12 and not being able to find it is great. Again, probably reading too far into this, but I thought it was a bit of a metaphor. This is what the Doctor says about it in the episode. The numbering is a bit confused, like the rooms are all jumbled up. Maybe they move around. I think, personally, that relates to the fact that the Doctor time travels and you don't always meet the Doctors in the right sequence, and you'll randomly, and if Stephen Moffat's in charge, you'll randomly get a new Doctor that no one knew about slap bang in the middle of all the other Doctors. Sorry, Stephen, for going there. I did love this episode, but I still hold you completely accountable for that 50th episode. And then the episode became even less kiddie-friendly. If the kids weren't already absolutely petrified. We then had the Doctor seemingly breaking his own hand while punching a diamond wall, whilst the scary cape thing was coming up behind him. We then had the creepy fingers going over his face, and he was burned. The fingers actually burned his flesh. We saw his singed flesh. But that wasn't the end of it. We didn't just see him get singed. We saw the poor man crawling, burned along the floor, spending a day and a half trying to get up a staircase. At which point he literally burned himself to death, only to relive the entire nightmare all over again. And I mean, it's clever. It's so clever, but it's incredibly distressing. I mean, I never ever like to see the Doctor in that much pain. It was enough for me to see the 10th Doctor fall through the glass roof that one time and have cuts all over his face. That was horrible. It was disturbing for me to see him in the radiation chamber at the end of time. I didn't really need to see the 12th Doctor, who I've really completely fallen in love with, like, burned to a crisp and crawling along the floor. I mean, maybe that was too adult for Doctor Who, maybe it really was. But then again, Doctor Who has been playing later in the evenings this series, and to be honest, I haven't heard that many complaints, and it doesn't seem to have taken away from the fact this episode was pretty damn iconic. So I guess that's just a matter of personal preference. I suppose people with kids out there will have a better idea of how suitable that sort of thing was when they were watching it with their kids. For someone like me who's used to watching Game of Thrones, I mean, it was disturbing and not very nice to watch, but, you know, fine. Now I am sorry to turn this very serious review into something where I take the piss ever so slightly, and I do it lovingly, I really do. But in the bit when the Doctor's, like, on the floor and dying and talking, like, I swear that Peter Capaldi's Doctor turns into Alan Rickman at some point. Do you know what I'm actually going to do? I'm going to record that little section and I'm going to play it in this review so you can hear it. Because all I could think of was Alan Rickman the whole time.
Me, exactly as I was when I first got here 7,000 years ago.
The point in the episode when I started crying was when the Doctor said, "How long can I keep doing this, Clara? Burning the old me to make a new one. It's the story of his life, the story of his life. He burns himself to make a new regeneration. Oh, the story of his life." Did you like that? I enjoyed that. I'm not a big One Direction fan, so apologies if I got the tune a bit wrong there. So then we had that amazing montage where we saw the Doctor, like, living the same hell over and over and over again. I'm coming to the end of this review now. But yeah, basically when that montage was going on, I was crying a lot. It was really painful and just shows how attached I've become to 12. Like, I really cared about what happened to him in a major way. And not just because, you know, I'm a human being and I don't like to see other people in pain, but because I really care about him as a character. And he's so vulnerable, and it broke my heart into a million pieces. Over and over again. Someone really needs to take these confession jar things away from the Time Lords, because they are incredibly immoral things to own. It's just like one more reason to hate the Time Lords if you didn't hate them enough already. So then, of course, we had the big reveal of the episode, and I wish I hadn't known in advance. I hadn't been actively looking for spoilers, but it just seemed like everyone already knew that the Doctor was going back to Gallifrey. It wasn't like a big surprise, and I kind of wish it had been a big surprise, but I still got a tingle down my spine when the Doctor ended up on the sand and we turned around and then it was Gallifrey, it was the Citadel. I love Gallifrey. And I got so excited when he ended up there. I feel like I've wanted him to go to Gallifrey for a whole series, and he's finally there, and I punched the air with joy, I truly did. But yeah, oh, I forgot, I ought to give a shout out to the director of this episode, who is Rachel Talala. How many La's are there in that name? Rachel Talale. Oh, not as many as I thought, I was just over-exaggerating. Sorry, Rachel Talale. The episode was really beautifully directed, like, unsettlingly directed, just excellent. Like, you know she's been doing her research on, like, psychological horror. She's a brilliant director. I've loved her stuff so far. Okay, so thus endeth my review of Heaven Sent, and it was long, and it will be cut down a lot. If this takes a while to get to your YouTube screens, it's because I've closed captioned the damn thing, which takes forever, but it's worth it. Please tell me what you thought of the episode in the comment section, and no nastiness, because there's no need to be nasty, because it's just a TV show. I love hearing what you have to say about the episodes, and I do read all the comments, even if I don't get around to responding to them. I will try and respond to some this time. Right, love you loads, and I'll see you with another review. It will be Face the Raven next, I believe. We're going backwards through the series now. Okay, I love you loads, and I'll see you soon. Bye!